Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're unpacking a series that has generated just a ton of buzz, a fair share of praise, and honestly, quite a bit of online debate. We're talking about ZE5's Tamil crime series, Thadayam. It was released as this tightly packed, super atmospheric 90s procedural, and it really grabbed the attention of true crime fans right out of the gate. But it also left critics pretty heavily divided. So we're going to break down exactly why it worked, where it kind of stumbled, and what makes it just a fascinating case study in thriller storytelling. Let's get into it. Just picture this for a second. You're dropped right into the late 1990s. There's a string of horrific, ritualistic murders happening across rural villages, and the body count, it reaches a staggering 70. Now, what drives a killer to leave behind 70 bodies, stolen waist chains, and a bloody question mark on the wall? The wildest part is, this isn't just pure fiction. The setup for Thadayam is actually inspired by real, chilling true crime events from the Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh borders back in 1999. It's a terrifying hook, and it sets the stage for a seriously grim world. Which brings us to part 1, the 1999 border murders. Okay, let's dive into the dark chapter that serves as the foundation for this whole story. The killers operated with a very specific, calculated modus operandi. I mean, these weren't just random acts of chaos. They were highly ritualistic midnight murders. They targeted men for their waist chains and women for their Mangalsutras, their sacred wedding chains. And of course, there was that bloody question mark left behind, almost like a dark signature. The police were completely baffled, mainly because the crimes didn't point to a clear financial motive. Yet, they followed this exact, unyielding pattern. It's basically a textbook setup for a gripping police investigation. All right, moving on to Section 2. Meet S.I. Adiyaman. To catch a killer like this, you obviously need a very specific kind of detective. Enter our protagonist, Sub-Inspector Adiyaman, brought to life brilliantly by veteran actor Samuthirakani. And what's really interesting here is Adiyaman's character design, specifically this deliberate physical contrast. Side A, mentally sharp, but Side B, physically weak. During a press meet, it actually came out that Samuthirakani was specifically instructed not to work out for the role. The director didn't want your typical macho, chest-puffing supercop. No, he wanted a man whose mind is razor-sharp, but whose body is visibly exhausted by the system. There's even this fantastic anecdote about a scene where Adiyaman struggles to push a stalled jeep. Samuthirakani mentioned that his co-actor literally had to hold the brakes just to make sure he couldn't push it. It just perfectly captures that physical vulnerability. And this physical vulnerability extends right into his psychology too. There's this brilliant, really quiet character-building moment early on the show. This is back in the days before cell phones were everywhere, right? Adiyaman is standing right in the middle of a gruesome crime scene. And what does he do? He casually uses the victim's landline to call a student and cancel his side gig tuition class. It's such a tiny detail, but wow, it speaks volumes. It shows a guy who is so numb, so utterly desensitized to the violence around him, that a brutal murder scene is quite literally just another day at the office. He's just a man trying to survive a broken system. Now, let's look at Section 3, from whodunit to procedural. As Adiyaman digs deeper into the case, the series makes a really bold structural choice that changes the entire flavor of the show across its 6-episode arc. The escalation is rapid. Going from the first case to the conclusion, what fans really appreciated, and they were super vocal about this online, is the pacing. The total runtime of the entire series is only about 130 minutes. That is quick. It makes it a highly bingeable, fast-paced watch. Audiences praised it as an honest, family-friendly thriller that really doesn't drag you down with unnecessary filler. But here is where the show makes its absolute biggest gamble: the early killer reveal. Instead of keeping us guessing until the very last episode, the creators just go ahead and show us the murderous duo right out of the gate. They purposefully shift the tension here. It's no longer a classic whodunit mystery. It morphs into this tense cat-and-mouse procedural chase. We know exactly who's doing it, but the suspense relies entirely on whether Adiyaman can piece the giant puzzle together in time to actually stop them. Which brings us to Section 4, the mathematics of murder. Now, let's slow things down for a second to look at the show's rather controversial third act. I want you to fix this number in your mind: 70. Over the course of the timeline, these killers brutally murder 70 random, innocent people across the state borders. They spread terror, leave their bloody marks, and steal jewelry 70 individual times. But now, look at this number: 7. The ultimate twist in the final act reveals that all 70 of those random murders, they were nothing more than an elaborate smokescreen. Yep, the killers only ever actually cared about 7 specific targets. It turns out these were revenge killings tied to an injustice surrounding a counselor's murder way back in 1995. So the crucial point here is, well, the math just isn't mathing, and critics were incredibly quick to point this out. I mean, think about it. Committing 63 highly visible, brutal extra murders just to hide 7 specific targets is wildly illogical. Rather than feeling like a stroke of criminal genius, reviewers felt it completely derailed the plot. The writing essentially asked the audience to believe that the killers would go to such absurd lengths to mask their true motive, and for a lot of viewers, it just completely broke their suspension of disbelief. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the final verdict. So, how did the internet, the fans, and the critics actually react to this climax? Well, let's start with the fans. On platforms like X, the reaction was largely positive when it came to the viewing experience itself. One viewer called it an above-average investigation drama, noting the plotline was interesting and loving the short and crisp 130-minute runtime. Viewers really dug the fast pace, the seamless bilingual blend of Tamil and Telugu, and of course Samuthirakani's incredibly grounded performance. For them, it made for a really easy, satisfying weekend binge. However, the critical reception sharply contrasts with that casual fan praise. Outlets like Alt Bollywood voiced sheer frustration. As they put it, the writers completely abandoned the plot in the final act. Their take was that the show had this really rushed energy at the end, prioritizing a heavy-handed, almost preachy social commentary over delivering an airtight, logical resolution to the mystery they'd just spent hours building up. And this brilliantly illustrates the wider critical consensus. OTT Play mirrored this exact sentiment. They called Samuthirakani a solid protagonist, but ultimately labeled the show a preachy crime drama with no payoffs. The India Herald totally agreed with this, noting the fantastic 90s atmosphere but pointing out that the underdeveloped antagonist psychology and that preachy ending really ended up undermining the show's true potential. So, bringing it all together, what are the ultimate hits and misses across the board? Well, on the hit side, we have some undeniable strengths. That authentic, dusty 90s rural atmosphere is fantastic. We've got Samuthirakani's wonderfully restrained acting, the crisp 130-minute runtime, and a really strong character design for our lead detective. But over on the misses side, the flaws are pretty structural. You've got that rushed, preachy climax, the highly illogical 70-7 murder motive, an early killer reveal that some felt actually killed the suspense rather than building it, and finally, villains whose psychology was simply too underdeveloped to carry the weight of that ending. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. Does a heavy-handed moral message, even one with totally flawed mathematical logic, actually ruin a great thriller? Or does it just change the conversation, giving us something a bit deeper, albeit imperfect, to chew on? Look, whether you think Thadayam is a masterpiece of atmosphere or a frustrating misfire of logic is completely up to you. But it for sure proves that a 130-minute runtime can spark a whole lot of debate. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning what's on your screen.